4,000 years ago, an ordinary family in northwestern China prepared a bowl of noodles. They probably assumed that the next day would arrive just like any other. But that meal was never finished. Thousands of years later, archaeologists excavating a buried house discovered a pottery bowl lying upside down on the floor. When they carefully lifted it, they found something underneath that should have disappeared long ago. A tangled mass of thin, fragile strands. They were the remains of noodles buried for roughly 4,000 years. But the bowl was not the most disturbing discovery inside this village. In nearby homes, archaeologists found the people who never escaped. Adults and children lay inside the rooms. Some had been pressed against the walls. Others were clustered closely together. The houses were damaged. The ground was split by cracks. And thick layers of mud had buried nearly everything. This place is known as Lajia. It has sometimes been called China's Pompeii. But Pompeii was destroyed by a volcano. At Lajia, the identity of the killer is still debated. Was it an earthquake? A sudden flood? A wall of mud? Or a chain of disasters that struck one after another? Today, we're going to reconstruct the final hours of Lajia. And our first clue is a bowl of noodles that no one ever finished. Lajia lies along the upper reaches of the Yellow River in what is now China's Qinghai province. The settlement existed roughly 4,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years before the first emperor united China. There was no Chinese empire yet, no Great Wall, none of the famous dynasties that most people associate with ancient China. The people who lived here belonged to what archaeologists call the Lajia culture. Lajia was not an imperial capital or a giant ceremonial center. It was closer to a prehistoric village made up of ordinary households. Its people grew millet, raised animals, cooked meals, and made tools inside partly sunken homes. They left behind no written records and no personal names. But their houses, pottery, food, and everyday objects show that this was once a stable, living community. Then, on one terrible day, normal life suddenly stopped. Food was left behind. Pottery remained inside the houses. And some residents never made it out of their rooms. Whatever happened, it happened fast. In 2005, a study published in the journal Nature brought worldwide attention to Lajia. Researchers examined the fragile strands found beneath the overturned bowl and identified them as the oldest physical evidence of noodles then known. They were thin and yellowish, trapped beneath the bowl and covered by thick layers of sediment. That unusual burial environment may be the reason they survived at all. Under normal conditions, food this delicate would have decomposed thousands of years ago. But these were not ordinary wheat noodles like the ones most of us eat today. Early research suggested that they were made mainly from millet hardy grains that once formed a major part of the diet in northern China. Millet does not contain the kind of gluten that makes wheat dough stretchy. So exactly how ancient cooks turned it into long, thin strands remains an interesting subject of experimentation and debate. The discovery matters for more than just its age. It shows that ordinary people in prehistoric China had already developed surprisingly sophisticated ways of processing grain. But the position of the bowl raises another question. Why was it upside down? Did it fall when the house collapsed? Or did something powerful rush into the room and flip it over? The answer may be connected to the people found inside the other houses. Archaeologists discovered groups of human remains inside several homes at Lajia. They included both adults and children. These were not carefully arranged burials. The people had died inside their living spaces. Some were found near walls. Some lay close together. In certain cases, an adult appeared to be positioned between danger and a smaller child. We have to be careful here. A final position cannot prove exactly how two people were related, or tell us with certainty what someone was doing during their last moments. But these remains do reveal something important. The disaster gave them almost no time to escape. If the village had faced only a slowly rising flood, people should have had some opportunity to leave their low, partly sunken homes and reach higher ground. Instead, they were trapped inside. That suggests the first blow may not have come from the river. It may have come from beneath their feet. Lajia sits in a geologically active region. Investigations of the site have found deformed floors, damaged buildings, and intersecting cracks in the ground. That makes an earthquake our first suspect. Imagine the scene. The ground begins to shake without warning. The walls of the sunken houses split. Roof supports fail. Pottery crashes to the floor. Soil and debris block the exits. Anyone inside may have had only seconds to react. An earthquake could explain the damaged homes, the cracked ground, and why some residents were unable to escape. But it cannot explain everything. Lajia was not simply a village crushed by shaking. Large amounts of sediment entered the houses, filled the cracks, and buried people, pottery, and household objects. If the earthquake was only the first blow, where did the second one come from? The landscape around Lajia contains gullies and large amounts of loose, easily eroded sediment. During intense rain, water can race through those gullies, collecting soil and debris as it moves toward lower ground. This would not necessarily look like a giant Hollywood tsunami. The real danger may have been something heavier, thicker, and far more difficult to escape. A fast-moving wall of mud. Once mud entered a sunken house, it could quickly block the exit, pin down objects, and fill the very space where people had taken shelter. For buildings already damaged by an earthquake, the consequences would have been devastating. Several studies have therefore argued that flash floods and mudflows from nearby gullies better explain at least some of the sediment covering Lajia than a single, enormous flood coming directly from the Yellow River. But the earthquake and the mudflow may not be competing explanations. They may have been separate stages of the same disaster. And 4,000 years later, another earthquake in almost the same region showed how that could happen. In December 2023, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck the Jishishan region, only a short distance from Lajia. The danger did not end when the shaking stopped. In some areas, the earthquake was followed by soil liquefaction, ground failure, landslides, and high-speed mudflows. Mud and debris traveled along channels and poured into villages, burying homes. During the rescue operation, 3 adults were reportedly found protecting 2 children who had been wrapped in a quilt. A 2024 study compared that modern scene with the positions of adults and children discovered at Lajia. The researchers argued that the similarity could reflect the same human instinct. Adults gathering around children as mud suddenly entered a home. That comparison does not prove the identities of the people at Lajia. And by itself, it cannot solve the entire case. But the modern earthquake provides a disturbing real-world model for what may have happened 4,000 years earlier. First, an earthquake damages the ground and the buildings. Then the soil liquefies or begins to slide. Mud and debris race through nearby gullies and enter structures that are already weakened. A 2026 study published in the journal Katna also connected the earthquake cracks at Lajia with the flash flood and mudflow deposits covering the settlement. A possible sequence begins to emerge. A powerful earthquake strikes the village. Homes are damaged, residents become trapped, cracks open across the ground. Then intense rain, flash flooding, or mudflows move into the settlement, filling those cracks and pouring into the sunken houses. The people of Lajia may have lost their shelter first and their escape routes moments later. That could explain why so many never made it outside. But the case is still not completely closed. Because another, more dramatic theory once connected Lajia to one of China's oldest legends. Ancient China had its own story of a great flood. According to the legend, a hero known as Yu the Great eventually brought the waters under control. His story later became connected with the Xia, traditionally described as China's earliest dynasty. In 2016, researchers proposed that an earthquake around 1920 BC triggered a massive landslide in the upper Yellow River. The landslide blocked the river and created a temporary lake. When that natural dam finally failed, an enormous volume of water may have rushed downstream. The researchers suggested that this event could have inspired China's Great Flood story. It was a compelling chain of evidence. An earthquake, a collapsed natural dam, a prehistoric settlement, a catastrophic flood. and an ancient legend about the birth of a dynasty. The pieces seem to fit almost perfectly, maybe too perfectly. Later studies challenged the timeline. The natural dam, the deaths at Lajia, the earthquake evidence, and the different flood deposits may not all belong to the same event. That means the Yellow River flood may not have directly destroyed Lajia, and Lajia alone cannot prove that the story of Yu the Great or the founding of the Xia Dynasty happened exactly as later traditions described. This is one of archaeology's most dangerous temptations. When a discovery is dramatic enough, we want it to confirm an even greater story. But events occurring in roughly the same period are not automatically connected. And sometimes, the most exciting answer is not the one best supported by the evidence. We may never know the exact second when the disaster at Lajia began. Did the earthquake strike first? How long did it take for the mud to reach the village? Did the residents face one catastrophe or several events in rapid succession? And when, exactly, did that bowl fall upside down? Some of those questions remain unanswered. But the noodles matter for more than their place in the history of food. Emperors leave behind tombs. Dynasties leave palaces. Wars leave weapons and city walls. Ordinary people rarely leave their voices behind. The people of Lajia left no names and no written accounts. They left their homes, their pottery, their tools, and a meal that was never finished. 4,000 years ago, someone prepared that food. They assumed that life would continue as it always had. Then the ground began to move. The houses cracked. Mud poured into the village. And within a very short time, their world stopped. We may never identify the first force that struck Lajia, but that overturned bowl preserves something more personal than the rise and fall of any dynasty. 4,000 years ago, someone prepared a meal. They believed they still had time to eat it. They didn't. The noodles survived. Many of the people of Lajia did not. If you want to discover more Chinese historical mysteries that most American viewers have never heard of, subscribe to the channel. Because beneath the soil of China, many cases are still waiting to be solved.